Support for Live in 225 is provided in part by the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research at Cal Poly. For more information or to support the center, please visit organic.calpoly.edu. That's organic.calpoly.edu for the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research at Cal Poly. Support for Live in 225 is provided in part by AgCom Central. Visit AgCom Central on twitch.tv/AgComCentral or on our website, agcomcentral.com, where you can follow our social media. That's twitch.tv/AGCOMM Central for AgCom Central. Support for Live in 225 is provided in part by the Department of Agricultural Education and Communication at Cal Poly. Visit aged.calpoly.edu to register for our programs or to show your support. That's aged.calpoly.edu for the Department of Agricultural Education and Communication at Cal Poly.
Alrighty, good morning everybody. This is Live in 225. I am your host, Natalie Victorine, and today is episode 3 of our podcast series about organic agriculture. And today we have a little bit of a different episode. We're going to be talking about challenges to the organic ag industry and what that pertains to, and kind of figuring out some solutions or ways to navigate these challenges in the organic industry. Here with me on the panel, we have Dr. Mike. Say hello.
Oh yeah, it's Dr. Mike again, AgCom's professor, just, doing all the things, and it's going fantastic so far, I say.
Alrighty, and we have Dr. Amanda Frye with us here today. Could you give us a little bit of an introduction, a little bit of your background, and one thing that you're excited about today?
Oh, wow, sure. Good morning. My name is Dr. Amanda Frye. I'm a sociologist, and my training is in education with a focus on race, inequality, language. I look at sort of the intersections of inequality around race, class, gender, sexuality, language, and how that impacts educational equity. But before I came back to academia, I worked in the nonprofit sector for a whole number of years. 11 years of which I spent as executive director of a multi-service community agency on the East Coast, where we had a range of human services and supportive services for predominantly low-income and minority communities. Preschool program on site, before and after school programs for kids, teen center open evenings and weekends, and we also had the only daily meal site in the county. We offered a hot breakfast every day for anybody in the community who needed a meal, working people and unhoused people, primarily. And we also had the largest food pantry in the county. So I'm really kind of coming today, speaking from that bank of experience, working with folks who experience challenges around not only hunger, but driven by sort of other major areas of life: employment challenges, education, healthcare, housing. Yeah, it all kind of comes together.
That is really impressive. Thank you again for having the chance to sit with us and join us on this discussion today.
I was delighted.
Not gonna lie, I'm trying to get Dr. Frye on her own podcast, so we may hire this entire crew to transfer over to Dr. Frye's podcast if she wants it.
That would definitely be very interesting and very, very needed.
Well, thank you.
And then we have Dr. Grieshop, who has been on our podcast in the past. Do you mind giving a little bit of an introduction?
Yeah,
kind of what you're excited about today?
Thanks. So I'm Dr. Matt Grieshop. I'm the director of the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research here at Cal Poly, our new organic center. I'm, as always, really excited to be here because I love to talk about all things related to agriculture and specifically organic ag. I'm an entomologist by training, so my emphasis is typically on the production side of agriculture, although I've done a little bit of post-harvest work, and as an educator, I've thought a lot about the other side of the food system or the consumers.
Yeah. Well, this is a lovely panel. I can't wait to kick off this discussion.
Me too.
We're just going to get right into it and talk about the main mission statement of the organic production industry. So Dr. Grieshop, would you mind just giving our listeners a rundown of the three main components of organic agriculture?
Well, that's complicated because organic agriculture has multiple definitions depending on where you are geographically and from a political and economic unit standpoint. So in the United States, organic agriculture has really developed to the point of a legal label that's managed by the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. And so the emphasis of the Agricultural Marketing Service has really been the application of a label that provides consumers in our food system, or eaters is maybe another way to say it, with assurances that produce that they're buying through our larger food system was produced via organic principles. And the principles really that the AMS is focused on have been around synthetic inputs more than anything else. So it's really focused on whether or not synthetic pesticides, fertilizer, et cetera, are used in organic production. But if you take a broader view of the organic movement from a very Western bias standpoint, the International Federation of Organic Ag Movements would add a very large social justice component to organic production. And from a production standpoint, the traditional emphasis has really been on the development of healthy soils to support healthy plants, to support hopefully healthy animals and humans and communities. But just like our food system, I mean, this is a massive, it's a massive edifice, and it has many faces. So depending on what your perspective and placement is, it's gonna look really differently.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about iFoam, and I like that they add that social justice aspect into their mission statement and what they believe in. Could you describe like a little bit about what that means for organic producers? Like what are some?
Well, I think in the United States, again, if you're going to put the word organic in association with your crop, it has this definite economic meaning. And I think as our larger sort of food system has, probably the best word is co-opted, but that word often has a negative connotation, but I don't necessarily think it is always negative because it's a sign of progress, even if it's incremental. So as the larger food system is co-opted and adapted to organics, it's really focused, on these synthetic inputs. But I think for the organic core, there's always been an emphasis on how do we produce things more sustainably for local communities. So how do we sustain local agricultural communities rather than moving towards, or the reality of our larger food system, which is very much not focused on sustaining local communities. It's really focused on extracting and packaging foods to push into this large, very much corporatized system.
I want to direct the conversation over to Dr. Frye. From your experience, could you see any of these inequalities in the agriculture industry and in the food industry, but more notably in the organic industry? Because there's definitely inequalities when it comes to distribution of food and distribution of healthy food. So I just wanted to direct that towards you a little bit.
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm not an expert on the agricultural side of things, but thinking about this from a social, economic, community standpoint, I think about ultimately in the United States and pretty much anywhere, right? Greater wealth pretty much equals greater health, right? And so when we think about who has access to organic produce, to organic products, sort of what that mechanism of consumption really looks like in American society, it's broadly directed towards those with the disposable income, the time to be able to travel, the opportunity to live in communities with greater access to these kinds of products, and the ability to purchase them. And so, from a sort of a wide lens standpoint, wealthier people will have lower levels of mortality, like better health outcomes across the life course, lower risks of things like hypertension, asthma. The U.S. has some of the most, like the largest income-based disparities in the world. And so when you think about these sort of massive scale production, our total food system, which is obviously a really complex organism, you start to think about, in some ways, the reproduction or replication of pre-existing disparities that we already have embedded in American society. And that, of course, affects who gets access to, who's able to get involved in the industry and who gets access to these products on the consumer end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that question of access actually translates really well to a production system standpoint, and especially here in California, where we have very high land prices, for anyone to get engaged in farming as a profession, access to land is it's sort of the defining. If you can't access land, you're going to have a really hard time.
It's the make
doing
it or break it.
It's the make it or break it. And so if you do have someone who's coming from a position where they have generational wealth, especially associated with land ownership,
it's a
lot easier to get into it. If you don't, and you don't have a lot of capital to try to transform into access to land, it's really incredibly tough. And that's someplace where I think California Certified Organic Farms, which is the largest certifier in the state, has been really quite active in developing granting programs, especially targeting first-time farmers. Really, they've had a big focus on farmers coming from Latin America and Latin American background to try to provide them with an easier access point to organic markets. And the way they're doing that is they provide $10,000 cash grants, which the farmers can then use to offset capital costs associated with land rent, because it's really just, even in California, hard to even own land. You're pretty much, regardless of your scale, you're probably renting land. And then also offset costs associated with the actual certification process. So paying for certification inspections, offsetting the cost associated with paperwork and everything else. But, and there's been some national investment just in the last couple of months with the transition to organic production program, but this is a massive issue that really, it's across our food system. If you're not already in the agricultural business, it's really hard to get into it on the production side.
And I'd like to add to that, two statements. From the production side, I remember Matt saying, people want to get at the household level. People want to get into organic agriculture, and even with restricted spaces, they would probably grow some stuff, but it doesn't have the nutrient-dense foods that you would want to produce to consume to get you the nutrients and the fulfillment of a full meal. And then from the consumer's perspective, and anecdotally, when I just got out of grad school, still not making full salary or whatever, I mean, the man on the street have to make the decision. Do I want to pay the $2-3 extra for an organic whatever it is compared to conventionally produced factory farmed items, which in the short term, those dollars and cents add up, but in the long term, what are the benefits to is it a direct benefit, or is it an environmental benefit that I'm paying into or buying into to give me the satisfaction that I'm doing the right thing as a consumer? And so I think those two conversations need to be a little more exposed. And
that's a great point. I mean, because really, you have the potential short-term benefits, and certainly, I mean, regardless of whether it's produced organically or conventionally, we have the data to say that, a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables and diverse, I mean, your baseline calories are still probably coming from grains and pulses, so, wheat, corn, soybeans, whether you're eating it directly or you're eating an animal that ate that. But that diversity in your diet is so incredibly important to the maintenance of health over the short and especially long term. Gut health, risk of cancer, heart disease, everything is so tied into that. So that's a huge issue. But then you also have the true cost of our food system. And so, what is the cost of the dead zone off the Gulf of Mexico, which is, twice the size of New Jersey. It's an area where, because of nutrient effluent through the Mississippi Delta, which is related to largely Midwestern agriculture, there are no fisheries there anymore because the water is so low in oxygen due to eutrophication, due to phosphate and nitrate overload, that that's a cost. And as a society, we all bear that cost.
Wait. A space like this actually exists, the size of New Jersey?
Twice the size of New Jersey right now, in the Gulf of Mexico. And this is not, I mean, this is it's not just restrained to the Gulf of Mexico. If you go to areas where you have rivers running into the ocean off a lot of agricultural land, and then oftentimes, poorly managed, human waste, so sewage, there are dead zones all over the world. And I mean, there's dead zones in the Great Lakes that are in the Green Bay related to hog production in Wisconsin. You have these dead zones. I'm getting off social issues.
No, I think I think it's really important to think about just from a the sort of wider perspective. Like what you're talking about are sort of decades of disinvestment in communities that have sort of been targeted for receiving that waste.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Oh
sort
my
of when we
goodness.
have this hierarchical economic setup where you have some populations that are privileged and protected, and some populations seen as exploitable or as seen as less important across kind of any number of measures. Those are the communities that receive the waste. That's where we start to talk about environmental racism. That's
Right.
when we start to talk about the disparities between the developed world, and I'm air quoting all over the place, and other countries who have been the receivers of the wastes of other countries. Right? Like we are in a moment, hopefully, where people are actually thinking about the sort of these sort of global interdependence issues.
So like plastic recycling,
Sure.
not just air quoting.
Sure,
But the
sure.
fact that most of that, it's getting shipped
Sure.
to other less economically developed countries and economies, and then it just ends up as a waste there.
But to be specific, I mean, and you were talking about the difficulty of getting into farming, getting into organic farming in the first place for folks who don't have family wealth, who don't have access to inherited land. That's sort of where you're seeing this push for urban farming. We were talking a little bit before we got started about programs like the Soul Fire Farm in upstate New York, or closer to home, the Israel Family Farms in Sacramento, where you have black farmers, black organic farmers reaching back to ancestral farming practices, thinking about soil health, and thinking about not only turning unused, discarded urban land into rich, healthy medium for growing healthy food for the community, but also turning their operations into education and support programs to try to create more urban farms and urban farmers in other disinvested communities across the country. So you have people like, Soul Fire Farms, Leah Penniman, her first book, her second book is coming out, but Farming While Black is her first book. It's a complete how-to guide for black urban farmers to think about building an urban organic farm from the soil health to production, teaching business skills as well as farming skills. They're really trying to create a movement, and they offer classes and workshops virtually and in person. They offer summer camps in upstate New York for new urban farmers who want to actually kind of think about reimagining the potential of these urban spaces that have been left behind in exactly this way. And Israel Family Farms does the same thing in Sacramento. They do education projects. They even have a program whereby they subsidize and help urban residents build gardens, right? Build healthy organic gardens, right? They'll come in and they'll do your raised bed for you, but they'll also teach you about soil management. And they'll also teach you about how to create and sustain your own source for healthy foods. It's building a kind of an interconnected, interdependent network of folks who are literally from the ground up trying to change the food system and trying to change these problems of access, so that health isn't only a privilege of the wealthy, right? Really trying to get at some of these basic processes to try to transform communities and transform people's lives.
And can I just draw back to the conventionally, culturally based agriculture? These people the people who have practiced culturally based agriculture know what they're doing. They understand balance. I read an article about, how the Aztec culture always had clean water, and when the Europeans came in, they just demolished their clean water system. And I'm like, I guess what I'm trying to draw is the African culture have their own agricultural system, Hispanic culture, European culture as well, and all these come into play. But since we're contesting between factory farming, is what I would call it, or conventional farming, and organically based farming, it's contentious because one definitely has its both definitely have their places, but one seeks to be regenerative in nature. So yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, you also speak to another issue there, which is not just on the production side. I think about the access side too, right? So, like for many urban dwellers, for low-income, majority-minority communities that have been left behind, by sort of federal, state, and local policies around urban development. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But for folks in what typically we refer to as food deserts, right? And that's a disputable kind of a term that has a lot of applications in a lot of different ways. We have these concentrations, these communities that are left behind, where there's no good place to access organic produce. If you can find
even
it,
if you can
even
find
right,
fresh produce at all.
right,
from
exactly.
Lansing.
If you can find it, there
There are neighborhoods where, your local food system is the dollar store.
right,
God.
and the organic produce, such as it exists, is still sort of an industry model, right? It's still sort of a large-scale operation. Typically, you'd find in a larger supermarket, and larger supermarkets don't want to be in those neighborhoods because their profit margin would be too low. So if you can get access to the organic produce, it's also then 25 to 40%, more expensive, sometimes higher than that, than the typical factory farm produce. Even thinking about farmers markets, which, of course, our lovely downtown Slow Farmers Market is a great example, in that they are working with the Market Match program, right? So, like, folks who are receiving public benefit, like their CalFresh benefits on the EBT card. CalFresh is what we call the SNAP program in California, so Supplemental Nutrition Program, right, that's available nationwide. Some farmers markets are signed up with Market Match so that you can actually use your EBT card, get tokens at the market, and then use those tokens to shop. Not everybody knows about the program, and not every farmers market. I mean, it's only like about 130, 150 farmers markets in the state that are actually even participating in Market Match. So you have the problem of, is there organic produce near you? Can you get to it? And if you can get to it, can you afford it, right? We don't have necessarily the mechanisms in place to create that avenue of access for everyone in the U.S. And that's another problem that the family farmers, the urban farmers, are trying to also address, right? By producing locally, by really thinking about the education side of things, by feeding people, but also teaching people how to feed themselves, and creating these networks of mutual support and interdependence, so that growers and members of the community that they serve are part of changing the reality of nutrition, the reality of health in their local communities. That's really what's motivating that movement.
I have a pointed or directed question to you. What is your perspective on organic agriculture generally? Like, I guess we should have opened with that.
Dr.
but-
Mike, I wanted to just interject a little bit.
Sorry, ma'am.
No, it's
We're
okay.
just talking.
This discussion has been really informative and eye-opening, just about the intersectionality of not just the organic agriculture movement, but food distribution in general in this country, and how that intersects with income inequality, race, and all of these other factors. So it's just been really eye-opening, and just thank you again for sitting on this panel. But I wanted to redirect. We're going to have a short break. We're going to watch a video that some of the production team has created for this episode. So we're going to just divert to that really quickly.
Don't need to switch.
One question. Describe your thoughts on organic agriculture.
So I believe organic agriculture is a different way of agriculture that's being popularized right now. It is healthy, but not necessarily sustainable, as it has a lot of methods and different mechanisms that go into it for actual organic produce to be cultivated at the end. And also, organic is not necessarily fully organic, as some amount of pesticides are also added into that.
Organic agriculture? I only know about GMO stuff organic wise. I know my boss Shin always complains about the labeling for organic products and how it's false advertisement, but it's pricey.
I have no idea what that is, but I hope agriculture is organic, so.
I'm gonna be honest, I really don't know anything about it. I probably should educate myself. I remember taking a biology class where a professor told me that organic doesn't necessarily mean organic. It doesn't match up with the biology term, but I don't know anything about that.
I mean, I don't think I've heard about it that much. The concept sounds cool. I don't know, I don't really know that much about organic agriculture.
I think it is a safe method,
to grow crops. It'd be great if everybody was able to like afford them.
Like, or
That was a really good video.
Yeah. One of the biggest questions that one of the biggest like concerns that came to my mind after watching that video is the gap of consumer education about organic agriculture and what that means. So I just kind of wanted to direct the conversation towards that. Dr. Mike, as an ag comms professor, and that's your expertise, what would you have to add to the discussion on this problem in organic agriculture and how we can better educate consumers on what organic actually means? Because a lot of these students in this video didn't understand what the definition of organic is and how that can benefit them.
Yeah, a really good question, and so that's been not a struggle, but like a really exciting journey for me, communicating all aspects of agriculture, right? So it's just that in this iteration of my application of it, it's based on organic agriculture, and I would say it's just about pushing the message out in the various forms, targeting different audiences, and generally speaking, as long as the man on the street has access to whatever food, that's their primary concern. And then whatever they can do beyond that to, supplement their knowledge on it, they would. But I think as college students, their primary concern is like getting to the next assignment. And so I don't blame these college students or the people in the video. I don't blame them for not understanding or not having access to the knowledge of where their food comes from, what different terms and definitions mean. However, it's also our responsibility, everyone in the room, and what the people are seeing right now or hearing right now are the experts on the panel, but there's a room full of agricultural communicators in here, and it's our responsibility, as I told them at the start of this course, to develop the messaging and the verbiage and the target audiences to get the messages out so that at least we're doing our part, we're taking care of our responsibilities to get the information out there. Now, we haven't gone into agenda setting by the media, framing by the media, gatekeeping by the media, and anything like that, because even though we put messages out there,
it doesn't necessarily
the platforms that we put them on are regulated by an algorithm or an AI person or a manager of that information. So we could talk till we're blue in the face. We still have to contend with media-related theories when we put the information out there. But our responsibility is to understand how we can get the messaging to the audience in a way that they would accept it and understand it. And beyond that, it's, we did our part.
Exactly. And I like that Dr. Frye mentioned the various educational programs that certain farmers use. I think you mentioned Israel Farms in Sacramento.
Yeah, it's Israel with a Y.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
No, it's great.
But I think that's something that is really important and definitely should be adopted by more producers, conventional or organic, because a lot of the disparity comes from the production side and not properly educating consumers on all of the work that goes into creating a product from field to fork.
I think that's really important, but it also, just viewing the video, like two things stand out to me. One is the level of skepticism. There's this label, but I think I heard that it doesn't mean what you think it means, right? Like, maybe everything that's labeled as organic really isn't. So that level of suspicion is interesting to me, as well as that sense of, it's really expensive, it's very pricey, right? It's like if those are the two major takeaways that we have, or just in what we were able to view, if those are messages that are coming through just from these like sort of light touches of inquiry, I'm really curious about where people get those ideas, like how is that message spreading in opposition and contradiction to the messages that agricultural communicators might be wanting to put out there.
Exactly.
And another thing that occurs to me, and maybe Dr. Mike, we need to do a research study, just now, I'm a parent, right? So my kids have gone to school on East Coast as well as in California. And I remember, and maybe this is common to your experience as well, the school nutrition programs having wide variety, right, in terms of the quality of meals that are offered for students. But when we were in wealthier, and I have to say wealthier and whiter communities, the quality of school lunches that are available to my kids at school, as well as the marketing and messaging around those meals being locally sourced, those meals coming from organic producers, was prevalent, right? It was part of the school department's desire to communicate this commitment to health and nutrition to families, to the wider community. But it's like on the delivery trucks that bring supplies to your school cafeteria. It's on the menu that gets handed out. It's in the messaging. It's in the weekly newsletter that comes home, that gets emailed to parents. So some schools that have this as a target area of like education and communication are doing amazing things, right? And of course, there's, being located in Central Coast, we have this great bounty around us. It's very easy for San Luis Coastal Unified School District to make those organic meals happen in the schools. But I would wonder, if you were surveying college students on this campus, whether there weren't some impact on the knowledge around organic produce and organic agriculture coming from these different kinds of educational environments, previous experiences that our students on campus may have had. So are people coming to Cal Poly with greater knowledge and greater knowledge because of greater exposure in their K-12 years, for example? And students who may not have had those exposures, are they showing different levels of understanding? I mean, I feel like that's a measurable project.
I think that the level of education definitely starts when you're younger and when you're in elementary school. And I think that knowledge and that not bias, but that knowledge that we have of the agriculture industry just really starts with what we're raised around. I did a research project on whether or not adopting policy to have agriculture education in primary school should be adopted nationally, and I really think that would be something that would really combat this issue of not misinformation, but uneducation about the agriculture industry and organics. And there's this
education, that's a really powerful word.
There's this one farm at this elementary school called Moss Haven Elementary, and it's based out of Dallas, Texas. And they have a small farm on campus, and they have some chicken coops, and they grow lettuce, and there was all of these quotes from the students that were like, I love knowing where my food comes from. I love getting to hold the chickens and learn about why they lay eggs. And I think that even though it starts at such a young age and these are such young students, we're shaping these minds into well-educated human beings that can just understand where their food comes from and how much of a delicate process that is. And I think that that's really, really exciting.
Yeah, I feel like, 100 years ago, that kind of knowledge was wider spread, right?
Exactly.
Humans always knew where their food came from. It's these kinds of industrial applications and sort of this economic environment that we're in is a recent development, right? So the sense of distancing people from the food that's grown for their benefit, from the production of the things that they need to live and thrive, that's actually relatively new if you're thinking about the arc of human history. And I have to also say that in lower income, more rural communities, black and brown communities, people have always had to rely on what the earth could provide and have always had to treasure and hang on to and pass down that sort of ancestral knowledge about how to create, as my grandmother would say, create something out of nothing, right? Make a way out of no way. That's what she would say.
Are you saying black people are more organic?
I'm not saying that.
I'm kidding.
I'm not saying that at all, but I do think, and people who've studied the history of American food cultures will talk about the ways in which poor people have eaten over time, have suddenly in the last 50 years become classy, become right, the province of the wealthy. The sort of the mark of privilege is now applied to the beans and rice diet that is for many of folks a struggle food, right? It's sort of how people were able to feed their families in times of great deprivation is now seen as chic, and it's healthy, and it's desirable, and in some ways it's out of the reach
Can we get
of black
another
and brown
hour?
communities.
We need another hour for more discussion.
That's a whole other topic. But I do think that the cultures and the communities that we're part of in these sort of formative years transmit a whole lot of messages that we bring into our adult lives when we actually have money in our pockets and have the responsibility of making decisions about how to prioritize our spending, what we're going to try to bring into our lives as far as health and abundance and vitality. And depending on what children are exposed to at an early age, you can see those direct impacts on the kinds of choices that they make later in life. There is a wealth of research out there on educational settings and sort of how teachers are teaching about things like climate change, how teachers are teaching about things like conservation and what the impacts of certain curriculum structures and classroom activities and school culture, like features of the school organization and environment, what they have, impact they have on students' understanding and awareness, the ways that schools teach about recycling and what to do with your lunch tray when you're done with it, right? Some schools have a great, make those into opportunities for teaching and learning, and you see those like proliferative benefits in the adult choices of the students later on. Teaching about agriculture, teaching about organic agriculture can be can make the same kind of impact. But I do think that, maybe we should ask some questions together. That's all research is, right? It's systematic observation, right? You ask the question in an organized way, and then you compare and think about your results. Yeah.
Anyway, anytime I could get to work with you, I'm down to clown.
For comment on that idea, I think one really important thing. So one of the things I've noticed, so we moved here from Michigan about just over a year ago, and I've got kids in public school system, and I would absolutely agree with you. If you look at just the trucks delivering food to Laguna Middle School, which are the ones I see a lot, that sort of locally sourced organic produce is very much forward. Didn't see that. And my kids were going to a wealthier high school in the Lansing area, and but the geographics, I think, had a huge impact on that. We didn't see that as much there because it's frozen 7 months out of the year, so you're not really growing much when there's snow on the ground. But in California, I think that rural-urban divide and sort of the plight of rural communities and the folks living in those rural communities would be a really interesting cross-section for what you're talking about. Because I suspect, I don't have the data, but I suspect that folks in the Bay Area, the Central Coast, maybe in some areas of Southern California, you're seeing more of that sort of farmers market, local ag tie-in to schools compared to what you might see in, say, Salinas or the Imperial Valley or Santa Maria even.
Right, even in communities where there's growing going
all
on.
The food is being produced.
But it's being produced for other places.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that, the opportunity given the range of those localities that we draw students from, especially a lot of our transfer student population, would be a really interesting set of subjects. Now I'm getting all like researchy, scientisty.
Wait. Are we just all going to do a research project together?
We just might have to do it.
I would be happy to see the center get involved with something like that. We just have to talk about organics a little. But I definitely, the idea about ag ed, to me, it far surpasses organics. It really is. I love what you said about human history and our connection to food. For most of our 250,000 year history as social mammals, food has been one of the organizing principles behind our day-to-day life. Where how you're going to feed your kids, how you're going to feed yourself is something that we are all intimately involved in. And really, it's only in the last 200 years where that has changed significantly for a vast proportion of the population. There's always been wealthier elites that maybe didn't have to worry about that so much.
I wanted to touch on one of the issues about, you were talking about distribution, and you were mentioning like the Imperial Valley and some of these like powerhouses, you would say, in the agriculture industry and food production. One of the biggest concerns or issues in the organic industry currently is this push for consolidating of certain areas of the organic ag industry. And for some people, that might come across as a violation of the social justice component of organic agriculture. Could you discuss a little bit more about what that means to you and your stance on the consolidation? Because some people think that when you consolidate, your employees are getting fair treatment because it's a larger consolidation. But then we have this issue of individual organic operations and empowering their platform and
Right.
giving them the freedom to make their own choices when it comes to like their their workers' welfare and things like that.
So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I think
In 2 minutes.
But the first and foremost, for me, as I've gotten older and I've been interacting with the organic movement for 20 some odd years now, my personal philosophy is really much more around the sort of a do less harm. I mean, that to me, that's if I got a tattoo of words, it would probably be that. And that's really drawn from treatment of folks who have substance issues, or like addiction disease. I mean, that's really where that philosophy comes from. But I see a lot of parallels in our agricultural system. So the reality is that we have an urbanized population. A very small percentage of our population is involved in actual production of food at this point. For most of us to eat, we have to penetrate that large industrial food system. And so from my perspective, organics are, the consolidation of organics can be viewed as a good thing because we are pushing into these food systems and doing less harm, at least to the land. From a social and economic standpoint, I would not be the first to say this, but having run some small organic operations where we never got paid, there are some economic advantages to scale. And the weird thing is, in a lot of organic farms that I've interacted with, a lot of them rely on a lot of volunteer labor. There's a lot of people not getting paid, woofers, community activists, et cetera, whereas at the larger scale, pretty much everyone's getting paid. And so, again, it's multidimensional. It has many faces. Depending on where you look at it, you're going to get a very different impression. My hope is that we're always making progress on both fronts. So the idea is I want everyone to have access to healthy produce and preferably organic produce, and I don't want them to go broke buying it. But also, I want to see more people really engaged in the food system and seeing both sides rather than just one. And that's the big tendency I see. Folks on the production side, we tend to get very production oriented, and we lose sight of the fact that we exist because there's people eating this stuff. Folks on the eating side, they get really fixated on, hey, can I afford this? What do I want to eat? I want blueberries 12 months out of the year, whatever. And they don't see the production side. So bridging that gap and getting conversations going is, to me, that's how we move forward together and create a better future for everybody. But it's taken us, in the United States, it's taken us 400 years to get here, and the basis of agriculture was slavery and indentured servitude. So, those are the building blocks that went into building the system that we all rely on. So how do we make it gentler? How do we do less harm? How do we move forward together?
Right.
And we can't change it overnight because we have to eat.
But it can start with us. It can
But
start
it has
with
to
small
start
stuff.
with
It
us.
has to.
Well,
Yeah.
can I just ping in here?
Yeah,
Because
Thank
the
you, please.
tradition of relying on exploitable labor is something that you can't ignore, especially when you start to raise these questions about whether consolidation in the industry is actually consistent with that social justice idea. And I find a troubling irony, like a really problematic chord is struck for me when we think about, kind of like the rise in public awareness around organic food is intimately tied up with the United Farm Workers strike,
Absolutely.
right? Think about Cesar Chavez, the Wrath of Grapes speech, right? Thinking about the widening American awareness of the harm of pesticides, not just in terms of the food that they were eating, but on the workers in the field.
Yes.
So we can't disentangle the awareness and the growth of the organic industry in the United States from that moment, right? In the 1970s,
not.
where people are being, like on the heels of the civil rights movement, where people are really thinking about quality of life issues and whether or not quality of life actually extends to every American, right? You can't take these two things apart. And so to say it's better for the industry to maybe skip over some of those concerns about what it means for workers, what it means for producers, what it means for all these organic growers who aren't getting paid to do this work that we're begging them to do, right? That people really are prioritizing and highly valuing in some places. That's a problematic irony that I don't feel like we can let go of. I feel like it
Definitely.
warrants scrutiny.
Oh,
We gotta
it's
wrap
at
up.
the center of it. I agree 100%.
I wish we
Something
could
I
keep
think about every
talking.
day.
This
Yeah.
has been such an informative conversation, and definitely one that has been long overdue in the terms of like agriculture education and the organic industry and how that intersects with the consumer population and all of their identities. But I just wanted to say thank you again, Dr. Frye, for joining us here on this podcast. Your insight and your experience has been unforgettable. Dr. Grieshop, thank you again for sitting in with us.
See you on Friday.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Dr. Mike, thank you again.
I'm here all the time.
And this is an amazing discussion, an amazing podcast episode. So thank you guys.
Thank
I
you.
think we'll wrap up this episode of Live in 225.
Live in 225 is a production of the AGC 225 class at Cal Poly called Digital Communications and Agriculture. Program funding was provided by the California Certified Organic Farmers Foundation and the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. Our production team for this episode was Morgan Elia, Griffin Wilson, and Lauren McEwen. Our director for Season 1 was Bella Anushian. Our host was Natalie Victorine. The executive producer, creator, and co-editor for the show was Moses Mike. Matt Grieshop was our co-producer. Our guest for this episode was Dr. Amanda Frye. Our audio technician was Melissa Frago, who was also our managing editor. The video switching director was Griffin Wilson. Our vocal talent was Jared Mandrell. Background music by LVY Music from Pixabay. Intro and outro music by Alex Grohl from Pixabay. Thanks for joining us.